If you're thinking of selling books on Amazon, how about learning from someone who is doing nearly $1 million a month selling books? I think you're going to like this one. Stay tuned. Obed, thank you so much for joining us. If anyone doesn't know who you are, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Thanks for having me. My name is Obed, and I am an Amazon seller. We are focused 100% on books. I started doing this about maybe 5 years ago. We still got a long way to go. I had a couple of other businesses. Right before Amazon, I had a fence building company. We would build vinyl fencing, metal fencing. That's actually a really good business. I pivoted over from fence to Amazon simply by looking at a graph and looking at my revenue doing fencing. It was, kind of steadily going up. And then my Amazon revenue was like going up. And then like after a while, it would skyrocket. So I'm like, man, if I stay doing this, it could be good. But if I do this, it could be even better. So I made the decision to switch over from what I was doing and move over to Amazon. So I've done a couple other businesses in the past.
Why books? Tell me about that.
So I never set out to be a bookseller. I was just sitting in my car one day, looking on Instagram, and I was scrolling around. I saw the same thing that everyone's seen, right? The screenshots and the people saying that they sell and this is how much they make. And I remember looking at someone's account, and then I'm like, hey, this guy can do it, I can do it. So the more I deep dove into private label, OA, wholesaling, I came across a post saying that if you want to learn, the best way to learn is to start selling books because it's cheap and it's a good way to learn how to sell on Amazon, and that's how you learn.
Last month, or give us like the revenue, give us the top line numbers at the moment. Where are you at so far?
Last month was August, which is our busiest month. We did almost $1 million in revenue. So we had 9.5 or 9.6. So I think for the year, we're close to 6 million. And we have a few more months left. So I'm thinking we can finish with 7.5 million, maybe 8. We have a couple of good things that are in the work. So it's possible that we finish with 8. We might shoot for 8 and be happy with 7.5.
What does the operation look like now where you are? And then I'd like to kind of learn the journey getting to there.
Okay, well, right now we are based out of Arizona. Our warehouse is about 35 to 40,000 feet of usable space with our inside and out. We own about 4 forklifts, 25 to 30 employees, and that's including our management team and our partner.
Is it just you, or do you have a partner? What's the situation there?
I do have a partner, and we do have investors in our company. My first day, I struck out. I didn't find anything. Then my second day, I went out and found, I would say maybe like 60 to 75 books. And it took me about 6 hours to just drive around through all the nearby stores in my area. So I found some inventory. That was my second day. My third day, and this is kind of how I got my start into what I do now. I walked into a store to try to, scan the shelves. And there was already someone there scanning. And this guy gives me the look like, ha, 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 I just beat you. And he walks away with a huge pile of books in his hands. And he's just like laughing at me. And I look at him, and his shoes weren't even like tied. Like he just looked like he was struggling. I thought to myself, this is the guy that, I lost. This is the guy that beat me. Like, this can't be real. So I went to the manager and said, hey, do you have any books in the back that haven't been put on the shelves? And she's like, yeah. How many do you want? I'm like, well, how many do you have? And she said, we have about 35 boxes. And in my head, I'm thinking, 35 of the, Home Depot 12 by 12, moving boxes. And I'm like, oh, I'll take all of them. How much do you want for them? And she's like, let me call my manager. Calls the manager. And she's like, you sure you want them all? Looks at me, and I'm like, yeah, I'll take all of them. It's like, all right, I'll go show them to you. She takes me to the back of her store, and she was talking about 35 of the pallet size boxes, which are like 4 feet by 4 feet, the Gaylords is what they call them. So she was talking about that. So this is my third day, granted. And she's like, all right, well, these are the boxes. Like, go ahead and look them over. If you want them, just, we'll pay for them, and then let me know how you're going to pick them up. And that moment, I made the decision. I'm like, it's either I run away right now and don't look back, or I'm committed. So I said, yeah, I'll take them all, and I'll pay for them, and then I'll figure out a way to get them out of here, and we'll go from there. So on day 3 of my journey, I got thrown into the bulk game of scanning mass quantities of bulk. That's the moment that turned me to where we're at now.
Wow. Do you remember how much it cost you? Like 12 of them, was that right?
I'd have to do some math, but I kind of finessed it a little bit. I was like, yeah, I'll take them all, but let me just take one to test it out and see the quality, because I'm used to buying, I was just finessing them. So I ended up buying my first box. I want to say it was $50. I had a Tundra, a pickup truck. So I'm like, let me go get my truck and I'll be right back. So I went and got my truck. They loaded it with with a forklift in the back of my truck, and then off I went. Then that I was like, well, now I guess I'm scanning books. So I figured out how to scan, overnight. So I stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning, getting rid of the box and try to figure out a way to dispose of them. And then I went back the next day, got another one, said, let me test one more. So I kind of bought me a couple of days time, and then I realized I need a U-Haul truck or a Penske to start moving some volumes. And so I think my first box was $50.
And you bought, what, 12 of them?
No, it was 35.
You bought 35 Gaylords.
35 Gaylords, my third day doing bulk. It's about 35,000 pounds if you want to put a pound measurement. 35,000 pounds of book.
And what were the results of that? Go on.
It was hard work, but it was great because all of a sudden I'm not having to drive around from store to store trying to find inventory. I could just stay in my garage and scan, and I could scan all night, scan in the morning, go to work. It was amazing. The results were great. It was, after that was finished, I was like, okay, it took me about a week, I want to say, or a week and a half to get all those out. And then I'm like, all right, this is good. Let me send these books in and then see what develops, or let me send in a pallet or something to Amazon and see what sells. And right when I was finishing up my shipment and I thought, like, okay, I gotta have a little break, I'm gonna go on with my life, the store calls me again and said, hey, we got another 35. Are you ready?
And did that relationship continue?
Oh yeah. I still buy from them now, even though just out of nostalgia, I keep them on as a source, and I pay them well. I overpay, but it's just, I owe them that loyalty.
So obviously I'm not a bookseller, I do OA, but when I think about books and I think about you buying these, or what I thought was 12 and now is 35, like Gaylords, these are like the pallets. Run me through some numbers, like in a typical Gaylord, like how many books would there be? What percentage of them would be good? What do you do with the bad ones? Do you have a bonfire? I'm guessing that's not very good for the environment, but what you did in the beginning, what you should do now.
Yeah, what you should do now. At the beginning, I was new, so I didn't have, my triggers weren't set properly. I didn't know you could monetize books on other platforms like eBay. So I was just simply scanning barcodes and throwing the rest away. So my yield was very low. It was about 5 to 8% of what I actually kept to send in to Amazon. So each Gaylord has about 1,000 books. I'm keeping about maybe 100, 5 to 10%. That's what I was keeping for Amazon. So imagine having to go through 90%, having to go through 100% of something and throwing 90% away.
My God, that's a lot. What would you do? Like literally just bin them, or like how would you get rid of them? That's a lot.
On my first day, I tried to have a book yard sale. So I posted on Craigslist book yard sale. And some people came, bought books for $1, but they didn't buy them all. And I was still stuck with mountains of books. So I had to load up into a truck and just drive around the city looking for where I could dispose of them. And finally, I met a center that allowed me to drop all the books there for free. And I'm like, oh, really? Well, we have no idea. So I kept going back and back and back, and just dumping books in my pickup truck until I found a better solution. So that was back then. Now we have a bit of a higher yield because we're selling on other platforms. We're able to monetize the books a lot better. We have eBay, Alibri, Ebook. We have wholesale buyers that we sell to. So there's just a lot of more opportunities to monetize each book. Of course, now we have actual recyclers that we partner with that want our books, that recycle the paper, convert them into tissues, toilet paper, that kind of thing. So now truck comes in with new material and truck goes out with paper recycle.
Numbers wise, I think you talked about 5 to 8% of the book, or should you say each Gaylord you were utilizing. I appreciate that isn't revenue per Gaylord, but it might be like, here's what we were getting and now we've done all these things, this is what we're getting now. Like, what's that measurable change been?
It varies because each loads are different. Each loads have different quality of material. So I want 15 to 20% of our material now is salvageable and able to be sold.
So it's still quite a high chunk, or like 80% goes to like recycling, I'm guessing. That'd be right?
Yeah, and we get paid per recycling, but the recycling market is always up and down, so we don't count on that for our business. But yeah, 80% of our books end up being repurposed.
Wow, I love it. Honestly, well done. Like, it's going from 5 to 10, up to like maybe 20%, massive difference. Your yield significantly improved. You've got these like what I thought was 5 to 10, now it's 36 Gaylords in the back of the truck, and a week later, you've kind of ship them in. Tell me about the story from there.
So I went from a pickup truck to, I rented a box truck, the Penske moving truck with the lift gate. So that took me about 3 trips to clear that out, to clear out the source. So once I factored in my cost for a rental for $300 a day, it was about $1,000 plus all the fuel and the time. And by the time they called me back to do the second pickup, I'm like, this isn't going to work. You know, it's cutting into too much of my profits. So I went and bought a trailer. It was about a 20-foot trailer, and you could fit 5 Gaylords on it. It's crazy. I have lots of crazy stories. So I took my pickup truck, and then I would haul a trailer in the back, and then I would do pickups of 5 at a time. I'd get there in the morning at 7 a.m., 7:30. I was the first one there. They'd load me up. I'd get to my house at 8 a.m., 8:30, and then I would just scan through all the boxes as fast as I could. I'd be done by 1:30. I would go to the recycling center. By this point, they already knew me. They're good. They have a forklift coming out to meet me. They're taking stuff off. I don't have to do it by hand anymore. And 2 p.m. rolls around, 3 p.m. I would roll back to that store before they closed, got another 5, went home, started scanning again, into the night. I could do 10 boxes by myself each day, 10 Gaylord boxes each day. And I would do that for 4 days in a row. So now you're doing 40 a week. And, that's when things really started to pick up as a one-man operation. So that was kind of my routine for about a year and a half.
How much would a Gaylord cost back then? Like, what would be your profit on it, for example? Like, and the costs involved? I'd love to know that. Like, oh my God, you're working so hard. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah. So, these numbers, they don't reflect there's a lot of other costs that are involved. I would get a Gaylord. Sometimes I would get them for free because they would not charge me. They'd say, no, just take them. Like, we need space. I would pay around $50 at the time for a Gaylord, and I would have to bring them back the pallet exchange and the empty one. And just on one book alone, you could make $100. You could probably profit maybe $200 to $300 conservatively on a Gaylord if you are getting it at $50 a piece. That was back then when I sucked. Now we can make a lot more per Gaylord because we monetize as much as we can, but probably making about $300 a Gaylord at the time.
Say $300 per Gaylord, and you're doing 5 Gaylords in the morning and maybe another, let's just call it 5. So that's $1,500 a day. Is that right? Would that be what you'd be making?
That's what I was making.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can see why I was like, oh, I'm doing this.
Yeah, no, I've seen the videos, I've seen the pictures of people with Gaylords. I'm wow, that's going to be a lot of work. And you're like, no, I'm doing 5 of them in the morning, and then I'm going back for more in the evening. I'm like, that's incredible. Tell me about that work ethic. Some serious grind, isn't it? You're already at the bookstore at 7 a.m. in the morning. You're already finishing the first lot by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Quick bite to eat, back in again, trying to get going again. Tell me about that work ethic. I'd love to know a bit more about that.
So this is what a lot of people leave out, either because they're not doing it or because it's not sexy and it doesn't get you the cool points. I made a decision at one point. I don't remember when it was, but I'm like, I'm going to go all in on this. I'm going to work. I'm going to put 100% of my effort and time, and I don't care if it doesn't work out. I'm just going to go 100%. I made a lot of sacrifices. I sacrificed my social life. I sacrificed my family time. I wanted to just scan books. That's all I wanted to do. And when you see the revenue and the payouts start to snowball and snowball and snowball, and then you start doing calculations in your mind, and you're like, wow, in 6 months, we're going to be here. So you just put your head down and get to work, right? I didn't care about birthdays. It was definitely very hard. It was 16-hour days, sometimes 20-hour days. And a lot of people, after doing this for a couple of months, I started meeting other sellers, and nobody really believed that, wow, you're doing all this by yourself. It's hard to believe because not a lot of people want to do it, and they know how much work it takes. It really is just getting up in the morning, not stopping until you're done for the day, which could be 10 o'clock at night, and then doing it again the next day and the next day and the next day, and then doing that consistently for 6 months, a year, before you can start seeing any type of progress in what you're doing. And this isn't just for books. This is for anything you do in life. You can't just put in the 9 to 5 and then Saturday, Sunday, go grab a beer with the homies. You have to sacrifice until you get to the point where you don't have to sacrifice anymore. Yeah, I put in a lot of work. I put in a lot of hours. It was unbelievable to some people. My back was hurting. Yeah, my fingers were dusty. I had a bigger vision in mind. So I sacrificed whatever it took, and I worked my ass off until now.
When we're here, we've got the first couple of Gaylords. You're now hustling 15 hours a day. What's the next stage? Tell me about that.
So I was a solo seller, which means that I did everything myself, everything. Now I had, help here, a friend would come over, help me scan, keep me company for, a couple of hours, or, there was help. I'm not going to say I'm completely by myself, but overall, yeah, I was a solo seller. I didn't have any employees. I didn't have any partners. I did everything by myself. That's from picking up the books to scanning them. So now what we would call that is sourcing, processing materials, recycling, listing, shipping, even cash to check, right? I did all that myself. After a while, then it's like, okay, I have 40 boxes from this company over here. I'm going to get another 10 from over here. Let me hire one person to come in on the weekends and like help me list, or help me, clean up my warehouse, my garage, or help me do something, right? Because after you get big enough, you can't do it all yourself. So you got to bring in at least one person to take some of the workload off you, or you're going to go crazy. You do everything until you can bring that one person in that does the scanning for you, right? That person doing the scanning, that doesn't mean that you get to take 8 hours off and say, well, I got Joey over here helping me scan, so now I get to go watch a football game. Or no, that means that now you take your time and do 8 hours of other work, more productive to move forward. Every time I brought in like someone to help me, I would always work just as hard or even harder. That led me to finally saying, okay, this could be a real operation here. I got 2 or 3 people working in my garage, right? And me, like, I need a warehouse. Like, we're still moving everything by hand with pallet jacks. These are 1,000-pound boxes. So not only is it dangerous, but it's really is backbreaking work. Once you kind of hire enough people where you don't have to do the scanning, the listing, the shipping, which is 80% of the business, then you can focus your time on other stuff, which is sourcing, looking at your pricing strategies, trying to save money on everything else that the business entails. Then you can put your time on that.
In your opinion, and by the way, I'm not saying this is a right or wrong, it's just how you would look at it, what would be some kind of metrics, considerations before like taking that first step into hiring someone? What would that look like, and scaling that up? It's
hard to judge it based on my work, right? I like to think that I had more tolerance for pain and punishment. If someone's telling me they're doing, I'm a seller and I want to hire somebody, I would ask them, well, how many Gaylords are you doing a day by yourself? Well, I'm doing 2 or 3. Like, that's not enough, Like, it's not. Like, when you're doing 10 by yourself for 6 months, then you hire somebody, because then you understand the speed of how things should be done. Then you understand proper way to turn your back. Like, all these little nuances that are required, right? All these little techniques and formulas that you have to figure out on your own before you can hire somebody else. Because if you suck at doing what you're doing and you bring somebody on, they're just going to suck as much as you suck. They're only going to get up to where you're at. No one's going to come in and work harder than you on somebody else's business. It's just not going to happen. You have to become the best at what you're doing before you can hire somebody else. And yeah, it's going to suck. Yeah, it's going to take time. Yeah, your back's going to hurt. Yeah, you're going to miss football with the boys. But if you're not the best at what you're doing right now, whether it's books or anything else, don't hire anybody. You don't. You're just going to waste time. You're going to waste money. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to on the fast track to failure.
Talk me through like one of your members of staff. Like, how many Gaylords could they do in a day?
So interesting now. I suck now compared to my staff. I had a mentality that I was the best at everything, right? And you kind of need that like gritty, like mentality of F everybody else, right? Like, I'm doing this. Like, you need that in the beginning because that's what keeps you kind of over that hump. When I made the shift in my mind to say, if I'm the best at anything in my company, I failed. I should not be the best here at anything. Like, I should find the people who are better than me. And if I don't think anyone's better than I am, I'm completely wrong in my thinking. That's when things really started to get good, and I started to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Then I found somebody that wanted to work just as hard as I did, sometimes even longer. Now, after doing 16 hours a day for a year or 2 years, now you only want to do 10 hours, right? And now you want to kind of cut it down a little bit for your own sanity. I'd bring a person that came in and, she wanted to stay 13, 14, 15 hours. And I'm like, you sure? It's like, yeah, let's go. And I'm like, okay, let's go. It's just trying to find people who are better than you and bringing those people into your organization. That's what's really going to help you.
Every hire you make into your business should increase the average. And if you understand that you are the only person and you're the average, then that means everyone should be above you. And I think it's such an important point. Otherwise, you get frustrated with the people who are below you all the time because you're obviously better than them. And I think it's such an interesting point. You talked about this girl who's like works damn hard, better than you. Like, how does it, like, that first member of staff, how does that work? Like, the compensation structure, is it like hourly? Is there a profit? Is there a performance bonus? Like, why does she want to work 14 hours a day? No one wants to work 14 hours a day. Well, she does, and we do, but that's what we think sometimes. So, like, how did you deal with that? How did you find her?
I want to say it was a Craigslist ad. This all depends on your region too, right? What you can pay somebody. If you're in a a bigger city, you got to pay more. One thing I have learned over the years is you cannot cheap out on your employees. You cannot. If your minimum is $10 an hour wherever you live, I'd pay you $20 an hour if you do double the work, right? You have to have that mentality of finding the best person and paying them whatever it takes to keep them at your company. There are people that want to work 12, 13 hours a day, or even 8 hours a day, but they want to crush it those 8 hours a day. They don't want to just come in and be mediocre. There are people that want to come in and whatever task you give them, they want to crush. You have to find those people and you have to keep them and pay them well. My first hire, I made a lot of mistakes in hiring people. That's a whole other podcast too, right? Yeah, you have to find people that are willing to work hard. You yourself have to be willing to work hard, because if you are lazy and you just want to sit in your office all day and pretend to look at emails, and then you bring somebody in who's a hard worker, they're not going to respect you. If they're working at a 95%, if you're at 65, they're going to drop down to 55 because they know that you're okay with that. You won't even recognize that they're not, working hard, because you yourself don't work hard. You have to work hard, make sure that the people that you bring on, just right underneath you, no one's going to be as hard working as you, but if you're at 100, as long as they're at like 80, 75, but they're consistent, that's a win. But if your 100%, what you think is your 100 is doing 50% of, what my 100 is, then you're only bringing employees that are doing 25% of what my employees are doing. I don't know. It's kind of all into perspective, right? And I'm not saying I'm the best. There's people out there that are way better than I am, but that's part of the goal in life, is just to continue to grow and get better.
There's so much we could dissect from that. And we could even, like you said, we could even do a whole show just on hiring. I think the one thing that I kind of take away from that is you said something which was find the right people and pay them as much as you need. And you can't pay the minimum wage. You've got to pay good salaries to keep good people. I think Alex Hormozy talked about it. Is good people will generally cost you twice as much, but they will deliver 5x the output. And people are probably sitting here hey man, I can how do I afford to pay that much? I'm looking at the minimum wage, and I'm coming back to what you're saying, which was if you're doing 2 to 3 Gaylords per day right now, you need to get to 10, because number one, you're going to get the money, and number two, you're going to understand what good performance looks like, and then you're going to find those people. Tell me the rest of the journey. And you've done some good strategic moves as well.
You start with one to help you do the scanning, and now you're also scanning at the same time. So now instead of doing 10 a day, now you're doing 15 a day. Then the listing becomes too much for you to handle. So then you bring somebody else to list while you're scanning. And then you bring somebody else to ship and package and send into Amazon while you're scanning. Now you've already scanned faster than material that you could bring in. So now you have to go and source new vendors. So now you bring in another scanner to take your spot. You got to fill the roles as you grow, not before you need them. Does that make sense? I wouldn't start off a company by hiring 20 people. These are the things that we're going to need. No, I would just start with one, me, maybe two, a partner, and then add on the people as you need them. Number one, it's expensive to hire people. Number two, these are human beings. You don't want someone to come work for you, leave their job, or, they want to feed their family, and then 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, you let them go because there's not enough work, or because your company goes out of business in 6 months. These are humans. You have to account that anytime you have somebody come into your organization, you're responsible for them. Don't bring anybody on until you really need it, and you can make sure that there's enough work for them to feed themselves and their family, because the last thing you want to do is get rid of people because you made a mistake. So you just start adding people on as you grow, and you always have to set the standard. So you're always, the people that fall below the standard, you're obviously trying your best to coach them, to get them back up to speed. But if they're not, you have to let them go.
What is your standard? Can you define that? You meet this, I'm happy. You don't meet this, we're going to performance manage you. And if you don't pick up, then we're going to go. What does that look like?
Well, now we have actual set standards, right? Like how many you have to scan per hour, how many new sources we have to acquire each month, how many boxes of inventory we have to maintain in our warehouse. So now we actually have a standard for everything. By the way, what's that book that we're reading? Traction. I recommend Traction to everybody and implement it in your company. It will change the game. But we have standards that we track across the board. One of our partners, he's really good at tracking the data and making sure everybody stays above board. And now we know within day one, if a new employee comes in and their numbers are here and we know right away, this person's not going to work. Let's give them 2-3 days to try to catch up. Let's try to spend some time with them. By day 4, hey, sorry, this isn't the right fit. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. And boom, bring in the right person. We're not going to settle for less than, what our top producers are doing. And in that same token, our top producers, we're paying them way above the minimum wage. They're getting money that they never got, and they're very, very happy. So they like coming to work. They like getting that check every week.
Could you share how many scans per day or per hour or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, our process is not the same as when I started, right? So these numbers might not make sense to another seller depending on where you're at in your journey, right? even some bigger sellers that we've met, that we've brought together in the community that we have come to our warehouse, we show them our process and it doesn't make sense to them. They're doing it differently. But let's just say, for example, we have a station that's a scan or pre-scan, and that station has to do about 150 to 170 scans per hour.
So what's that, like 3 a minute? Is that right? Every 20 seconds?
I'm not really too good at math, but yeah, something like that. Yeah, and not only do they have to scan, they also have to sort out material, the trash and stuff like that. So we have a very, very high standard when it comes to our scanning. That's the biggest bottleneck, right? If you can't get the books out fast enough, and if you're not up to standard, then we try to coach you. But if you're not coachable, and sometimes it's just not the right job for you, right? Sometimes you're great, but it's just, you just don't want to do the same thing over and over for 8 hours, and that's okay.
How you've managed to scale to nearly 8 million this year, you're looking at potentially doing, which is incredible.
We were doing 7 figures a year, and right around that time, the country kind of shut down and all this stuff started happening, and it affected our company too. Not necessarily in the sense that we had a loss of material, because we could still get the books into our warehouse. Just Amazon itself shut down the amount of books that we could send in. I think we had 75,000 units in our inventory at Amazon when this restrictions took place. So I'm like, I'm going to delete 25,000 units, take the big hit, just so I can send these units in and they can start selling and making us money. I deleted that. And right when I did that, almost like the minute after, I was almost like Amazon was waiting for me to do that. So right when I deleted an extra 20,000, then they lowered my limits again. And I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work, right? We had, enough money in the bank. We had enough inventory reserves that I thought I would see. Our lease was up in like 6 months. So it was just like that right time where I'm like, this time, maybe I'd throw in the towel, right? If I just shut down right now, I could survive to the end of the year and then liquidate, not lose any money, maybe even make some money, because I still had those 25,000 units, right? Like, I'll just send those in whenever I can and then just, live off that revenue for 2 or 3 months without having any employees, any rent, any overhead. So that was kind of like my strategy, right? So I was almost out of the game. So there had been a meetup that I had subscribed to or paid to get in, or it was just a book selling meetup that I had agreed to go to a few months prior, and it was coming up in a month and a half. And so I called the gentleman that was having that meetup, and I'm like, hey man, I'm getting out of the game actually, so I don't want to take up your spot. You give it to somebody else, I gotta let you know I'm not gonna make it. And shout out to him too, because I don't think he knew that it would lead to this, but he was just like, nah, come on man, just hang out, it would be fun. He started naming off some people that were gonna be there, and I didn't know any of them except for Romer the Romer was there, and Matt, and a couple guys I knew that I'm like, all right, well at the very least, I'll go hang out with those guys and have dinner for a day or two. Fast forward a month and a half, we're at the meetup, and I meet a gentleman, and he had a business, and he was just hit with the same scenario. Their limits were down. Our limits were actually higher than theirs at this point now, but their limits were completely down, and they had just raised money. So it was a company that had just raised money like 4 days prior to the meltdown or the shutdown or whatever. And now they're, they have, I don't want to say all this extra cash, but now they have surplus of money, and their business that they were doing also got taken a hit and almost is going to dissolve. And in good spirit, I started sharing information with everybody, because I've always done that. I've never been a closed book. So I go on there thinking I'm going to leave, but I'm like, hey, if I'm going to leave, I'm going to give these guys so much value. Here's what I do. This is what we're doing. This is what I did. This is what I did wrong. This is what I did right. This is what I wish I would have done, better. So I'm just freely sharing all this information. And the gentleman who was there, he was like, wow, is it cool? Can I come check out your warehouse before I leave? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. His name is Mark. He walks in and he's like, wow, this is insane. This is so great. And I'm like, this is terrible. I'm about to get out. He was like, oh, this is so cool. I wish that, we could have something like this. And then I'm in my head, my light went off. I'm like, well, you can't, because I'm getting out of the business and you can buy it, And he's like, oh yeah, this is interesting. 2 or 3 years later, I get a phone call. It's him. And he's like, hey, were you serious about letting us acquire your business? And I'm like, actually, I am. And we get to talking, and that's where we are now. Their company pivoted into my company. So they acquired my business, and I took an ownership stake in the new company, and I stayed on board to help run the operations in Arizona while they continued their operations where they were. And then now here we are today.
And are they like a book selling company, I'm guessing? Obviously they're aligned with you.
Yeah, they were a book selling company. They were not doing what I was doing. They were not doing the volume or the bulk that I was doing. And actually, it's funny, I was doing more revenue than they were as a 2 or 3 person team, right? And they had a larger team, but they had a different strategy, which was selling only textbooks and acquiring them through colleges and partnerships like that. So it was a completely different business than what they had. So they were in the book game, but they were not like in the bulk game that we are today. It was kind of like a perfect fit. Matter of fact, like I had to like explain everything. No, we get the Gaylords and we scan and we do this, and like you're like, wow, this is crazy. But they were in a position too that they needed something to pivot to because the colleges were shut down. So there was no inventory coming in. There was nothing, right? So they had just raised funds and they didn't have anywhere to basically deploy it to because their business got obliterated too, just like mine. Our model is a lot more scalable, faster than, getting a textbook, the ones and twos from the students, right? You have to go across the country and, it's still profitable for them, but it's very seasonal. They're only doing revenue, September, October, August, September, and then January, February. But the rest of the 9 months, 8 months a year, the revenues aren't as high if you're depending on textbooks. Now, my business was just cranking revenue out every month, except in August and January, it like doubled, tripled, right? Obviously, it was a win for them and a win for myself because I was getting ready to make an exit and they needed something else to do. So it was a match made in heaven. We teamed up, and this is where I say like luck comes into play, right? I would say I got lucky and they got lucky, and together we are, on a path to just completely dominating.
You were back at this event that I'm done, I'm out of here, I'm just going to give you everything. Man, I'm going to give you all my suppliers. I'm going to give you everything. Yeah. Like, you shared so much value in that conversation or in that like talk. I'm sure that, this guy was like, this guy is amazing. Like, do you think that had an impact upon it? Like giving without the expectation of receiving?
Looking back, I think that's all that matters is giving without expectation, because I didn't expect anything. I didn't expect to even like talk to this guy ever again, right? After dinner or after like our thing, I'm like, all right, these guys are going to go on about their life and so am I. But I don't want to get in his head and see what he was thinking, but I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, is that I just gave and didn't ask for, I wasn't even asking for anything in return. That's kind of why I want to get more into, more sharing, more information. And another reason why I'm doing this interview is to maybe help that one person out, right? Because when I was coming up in the game, nobody was talking about bulk. Nobody. There was a couple guys that were posting pictures here and there, but everybody was quiet. No one talked to anybody. Nobody wanted to share information. So I had to kind of learn the game on my own. And I just wish that, somebody was out there being honest and just talking about what it takes and what they've done, so that at least have something to reference.
What would you say to people watching now who are like, I want to be where you are in a few years' time?
You have to really ask yourself what it is that you want, right? Because you want to get to the size that we're at. We're talking 4 forklifts, we're talking trailers, we're talking, it's just a big operation. Sometimes I wish I stayed in that garage just a little bit longer because, it was just me, and like, the money was so good because I didn't have rent and I didn't have overhead and, I didn't have employees. So I would suggest to anybody that wants to start the game is to really sit and write down and really think about what it is you want to do. If you want to get to $100,000 a month, you could do that as a solo. If you want to get to, maybe you want $50,000, you could do that, right? If you want to get to $6 million a year, $7 million a year, you could do that. But as your goals get bigger, the work increases that you have to do to get there. There was 3 or 4 times that I remember that I was about to go out of business. There was 4 times that I had to just, man up, right? Is that politically correct? There's 4 times that I had to man the fuck up and just power through and work. And, I think my biggest stretch of not taking a day off was from like August to Thanksgiving. It was like maybe 30, 60, 90 days of just working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I would joke around. It's like, I haven't seen the daylight, right? In 90 days, but you just have to really set your sights on what goal that you want and realistically understand what it takes to get there. And once you know what it takes to get there, you have to ask yourself, am I willing to sacrifice what it takes? If you're a single man, you don't have to ask anybody. But if you got a family, you got a wife and daughter and kids, like, you are going to have to sacrifice. So that's something that you really, really want to do before you get started into this journey or any other journey. Size out your goal, what you want to get to. Talk to people like me or others who have done it so they can tell you exactly what it takes to get there, and then decide if you are willing to put in the work and make the sacrifice to achieve it. It is possible, but that's my one piece of advice that I would give anybody.
Honestly, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, and appreciate that. Yeah. You've been hustling so hard that you've been in like monk mode, like quiet for a really, really long time. So I appreciate that, the time you've taken out today, like having the interview. If anyone wants to get in contact with you, like what's the best way, or like follow your journey, should we say?
Don't call me. Yeah, don't contact me. Don't contact me. Just keep your head down, work. There's people who are way better than me. You see me following, Alex Hormozzi's and those guys for motivation. They're a lot smarter than I am. I just basically like brute force my way to where we're at now. And now with our partners, we have a little bit more of a finesse business. It's actual business that we can scale. And my day looks a lot different now than it did 4 years ago. I don't necessarily have to go into the office, right? I just basically busted my ass. Like, there's nothing special about what I did, right? Anybody could do it. All I did was just sacrifice 4 years of my life and friends and family and drinking and all that stuff. I just sacrificed everything. That's all I did. It's easy. Just sacrifice everything and bust your ass. There's no secret to it. You know, I'm not gonna give you any magic pill or journey. Like, if you follow me, there's no tip. There's no secret, like, magical like thing that you're gonna get by following me. Just work your ass, bust your ass, and that's it. But if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram. I'll let you put it up here.
If anyone wants to know, I'll put a link down below, so you can obviously follow Obed as well.
I'm not much of a poster, but I guarantee you that if you message me, I will message you back, and I'll give you some truth. It might not be what you want to hear, or maybe it is what you need to hear. Hey, you're slacking, or get your ass, fucking work harder, punk.
Honestly, I think that's the important thing. It's like, you're not going to tell them what they want, but what they need to hear, and that's
send me a message. Yeah, send me a message. I'm willing to help anybody that needs it.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you so much. Honestly, I absolutely love it, and hopefully, maybe sometime next year, I can probably pop out to Arizona and can actually see the operation in person, and maybe see how you've progressed and what's happened, and obviously any more top takeaways that you can share about, say, entrepreneurialism and like book selling and the journey, and maybe where you're going next. I'd love to hear about that as well. But for myself and everyone watching, thank you so much.
Thank you.